Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Kyle Abbott's world collapses in real time when Harrison is rushed into the exigency room, unconscious, pale, and terrifyingly still. And from the veritably first second it's clear this isn't just another cleaner dread but a life, or death agony that will scar the Abbotts ever. Because Harrison isn't just sick, he's fighting for every breath, and the croakers. Grim faces say what no parent ever wants to hear. They don't know if the little boy will survive the night, transferring Kyle into a curl of guilt, fear, and raw fear as he clutches Harrison's bitsy hand, soliciting him to open his eyes, while flashbacks of missed moments, bitter arguments, and broken pledges slam into him like a freight train, and Summer, shaking and white-faced, struggles to stay upright as the beeping machines mock her stopgap with their cold wave mechanical meter. Because this medical extremity doesn't come out of nowhere but feels like the ruinous climax of weeks of pressure, secrets, and dangerous choices that now feel cruelly inapplicable compared to the sight of a child lying helpless on a sanitarium bed, tubes far and wide, nurses rushing, and a croaker still advising that Harrison's condition is critical, a word that detonates inside Kyle's casket and leaves him heaving, because he can't escape the haunting aloud. That this is ever his fault, that his feuds, his distractions, his preoccupation with power and vengeance may have laterally put his son in detriment's way, and as Jack Abbott arrives, trying to be strong but easily shattered, the generational weight of Abbott heritage crashes down on them all, with Jack brooding that he's buried musketeers, lost loves, survived commercial wars. But nothing has ever scarified him like the possibility of losing his grandson, while Diane, torn between her fierce love for Kyle and her complicated place in the family, hovers hard, hopeless to help yet sorrowfully apprehensive that her once miscalculations have left her standing on the outside of this family's circle of grief, and in another corner of the sanitarium. Victor Newman's eyes narrow with dubitation as he starts connecting blotches no bone differently has noticed yet, because Victor doesn't believe in concurrence, and Harrison's unforeseen collapse feels too unforeseen, too accessible, too dangerous, egging whispers that this may not be a simple medical exigency at all, but the result of poisoning, tampering, or a reckless decision made by someone who no way intended to hurt a child but did anyway. And as the hours crawl by, the sanitarium becomes a pressure cooker of emotion, with Kyle pacing like a boxed beast, snapping at croakers one moment and breaking down the coming, constantly brooding, "Wake up, son," as if sheer force of will might drag Harrison back from the edge, while Summer tries to hold it together for Harrison's sake, indeed as gashes quietly stream down her face, and Phyllis, ever the storm, explodes with rage and blameworthiness, demanding answers, condemning the Abbotts, condemning fate, condemning anyone who has entered her, which only deepens the fractures formerly unyoking these families piecemeal. And when the croaker eventually returns with an update, the air seems to evaporate from the room as he explains that Harrison's organs are under severe stress and that the coming many hours will determine everything, leaving Kyle so overwhelmed he physically sinks to his knees, gripping the bed rail as if it's the only thing keeping him from falling into an ocean, because in that moment, power, plutocrat, and contests mean nothing. There is only a father soliciting the macrocosm not to take his child, and outside the sanitarium room, secrets poach and alliances shift, with whispers that someone saw commodities suspicious before, that a drug bottle may have been tampered with, that Harrison's collapse could expose a chain response of falsehoods that will devastate multiple families once the verity comes out. And as Victor still orders in disquisition of his own, Jack warns Kyle that if someone is responsible for this, the fallout will be disastrous, because Genoa City no way forgives those who hurt its children. And also, just when stopgap feels nearly cruel, Harrison's condition suddenly worsens, admonitions publicizing, nurses crying, croakers rushing in as Kyle is forcefully pulled back, screaming Harrison's name, his voice cracking in a way no bone who hears it'll ever forget. Because this isn't Cleaner Piece's psychodrama. Presently it's primitive, unattractive, intimidating love, and the occasion ends with the most nipping image of all, Kyle pressed against the glass, eyes wild with fear, brooding, "Wake up, Son, one last time as the screen fades to black, leaving suckers heaving, hearts pounding, and one brutal question hanging in the air. Will Harrison survive? Or is Genoa City about to lose one of its most innocent souls in a tragedy that will change everything ever? Harrison's life hangs by the thinnest of vestments, and Kyle Abbott is pushed past any limit he has ever known, because after the croakers rush Harrison back into the room and the doors slam shut, time itself seems to fracture, stretching each alternate into an unsupportable eternity while Kyle stands frozen, gaping at the red "Do not enter, subscribe" like it's a death judgment sculpted into plastic, his hands shaking, his breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps as recollections of Harrison's horse laugh, his small arms wrapped around Kyle's neck, his innocent questions about the world, all crash into him at formerly, and the guilt becomes stifling, because Kyle can't stop replaying every moment he was there, every argument that signified lower than this, every time he assumed there would always be further time, while Summer, slightly holding herself together, presses her win against the glass, brooding prayers she didn't indeed know she believed in, promising Harrison anything, everything, if he'll just open his eyes again. And Jack, standing between his son-in-law, feels hugely helpless. A man who has fought elephants and survived dishonors yet now can do nothing but stay and hope that ultramodern drug, fate, or sheer phenomenon intervenes, and as the twinkles drag into hours, the sanitarium becomes a battleground of whispers and gapes, because news peregrination gourmandize in Genoa City, and everyone knows that when a child is fighting for his life, no secret stays buried for long, especially when the circumstances are this suspicious, and Victor Newman, pacing with that familiar raptorial intensity, still grills staff, cross-checks timelines, and orders his people to look into every single detail of Harrison's collapse, because Victor is convinced someone squinched up, or worse, someone crossed a line that can no way be uncrossed, and meanwhile Phyllis, wobbling with slightly contained fury, begins connecting her own blotches, recalling odd exchanges, strange aesthetics, moments that felt off at the time but now scream peril, and she makes it veritably clear that if this turns out to be preventable, if someone's negligence or atrocity put Harrison in this sanitarium bed, she'll burn their world to the ground, consequences be damned, while Diane, watching from the sidelines, is torn piecemeal by her own private hell, knowing that no matter how important she loves Harrison, no matter how desperately she wants to console Kyle, there will always be people in that room who question her motives, who wonder if her presence makes effects worse, and yet she stays, refusing to leave, because in this moment, family isn't about blessing, it's about showing up, indeed when your heart is breaking, and also, just when despair feels total. The croaker eventually emerges again, his expression grave but not entirely hopeless, explaining that Harrison has been stabilized for now, that the immediate extremity is past, but he remains in critical condition, and the coming 24 hours are still extremely dangerous, offering a fragile splinter of stopgap that Kyle clings to like a lifeline, collapsing into a president, blubbing, openly, no longer suitable, or willing to hold it together, and Summer wraps her arms around him as they cry together, united not by love or contest, but by the participated terror of losing the one person who matters further than anything differently, and as they're eventually allowed back into Harrison's room, the sight is nearly too important to bear, with the child lying still, girdled by machines, looking incredibly small and vulnerable, and Kyle leans near, his voice coarse as he apologizes over and over, promising Harrison that he'll be better, that he'll always put him first, that he'll no way take another moment for granted, while Jack watches, gashes quietly rolling down his face, realizing that this extremity has stripped his son down to his rawest, most mortal core, and outside that room, the plot thickens, because a nanny still mentions to Victor that Harrison's symptoms don't entirely match what they originally suspected, raising the nipping possibility that this was an arbitrary medical event at each, and Victor's jaw tightens, because if someone tampered with Harrison's food, his drug, or indeed exposed him to commodity poisonous, the fallout will be nuclear, and as Victor digs deeper, fritters start pointing in multiple directions. Was it an accident tied to the ongoing Abbott-Newman pressures, contributory damage from adult wars that should no way touch a child, or was it commodity far more particular, tied to secrets that have been spoiling beneath the face for months? And Phyllis, no way one to sit still, confronts anyone who indeed ever looks suspicious, her grief-fueled rage kindling explosive competitions in the sanitarium hallways, while Kyle, eavesdropping particles of these allegations, is torn between wanting answers and stewing the verity, because what if discovering what happened means realizing he failed to cover his son? And as night falls and the sanitarium lights shroud, the emotional prostration sets in, but sleep is insolvable, and Kyle refuses to leave Harrison's side, sitting surveillance, counting every rise and fall of his casket, recoiling at every beep, every shift of examiner, alarmed that the lowest change could mean the worst. And in those quiet hours, old injuries resurface, with Summer confessing her own fears, admitting she's been so focused on proving herself, on navigating her complicated history with Kyle, that she occasionally forgot how fragile happiness really is, and Kyle admits that he's been chasing control his entire life, allowing he could manage issues like business deals, only to realize now that he has no control at each, and it's in that raw honesty that they reconnect on a deeper position, clicked by fear and love rather than pride, while Jack steps out into the hallway and still calls Tracy, his voice breaking as he explains what's passing, and her immediate response, pure, undressed concern, reminds him that family, at its core, is about showing up when it matters most. And just before dawn, when stopgap feels dangerously thin, Harrison stirs, just slightly, a bitsy movement that sends Kyle bolting upright, his heart forging as the nanny confirms that Harrison is responding, not completely awake, but fighting, and that small sign of life sends a ripple of conservative sanguinity through the room. Indeed, as the Croakers advise them not to celebrate yet, because lapses are still possible, and outdoors, Victor eventually uncovers commodity intimidating substantiation that someone close to Harrison may have intentionally exposed him to commodity dangerous, not out of malignancy, but through recklessness or despair, setting the stage for a shocking reveal that will rock Genoa City. Formerly Harrison is out of peril, because the verity, formerly revealed, will force everyone to defy how far they've gone, how blurred the lines between contest and responsibility have come, and as the occasion closes on Kyle gently brushing Harrison's hair, brooding formerly more, I'm right then, chum. The communication is sorrowfully clear indeed. If Harrison survives, nothing will ever be the same again, because this encounter with death has changed Kyle ever, shattered visions, exposed dangerous secrets, and reminded everyone in Genoa City that when adult games hang innocent lives, the consequences are ruinous, unrecoverable, and insolvable to escape. As the long, merciless night bleeds into a Argentine, exhausted morning, the sanitarium feels less like a place of mending and more like a gauntlet where every character in Genoa City is being tested, because Harrison's fragile breaths have come the axis on which everything turns, and Kyle Abbott, concave-eyed and pulsing from hours without sleep, refuses to move indeed an inch from his son's bedside, his fritters wrapped protectively around Harrison's small hand, as if letting go, indeed, for an alternate, might tempt fate itself, and every time a nanny adjusts an examiner or a croaker murmurs still to a co-worker, Kyle's heart hops into his throat, induced that disaster is about to strike again, while Summer sits near, her countenance sluggishly cracking as the weight of what nearly happened presses down on her, forcing her to defy a fear she infrequently allows herself to state, that loving this child means living with a constant terror that the world can take him down without warning. And Jack, standing just behind them, watches his son transfigure before his eyes, stripped of arrogance, stripped of bravado, reduced to commodity raw and pure, a father hopeless to save his child, and Jack realizes with a sharp pang that this moment will define Kyle far further than any business palm ever could, because nothing teaches modesty briskly than helplessness, and nothing burns precedences into your soul like the possibility of loss. And yet indeed, as a thin thread of stopgap holds, the pressure doesn't ease, because beneath the face of this medical exigency, commodity darker continues to coil and strain, with whispers growing louder that Harrison's collapse may not have been a cruel twist of fate, but the result of a ruinous mistake, and Victor Newman, who has now virtually set up camp in the sanitarium corridors, becomes decreasingly convinced that the verity will be unpretty and more particular than anyone wants to admit. And when he eventually corners the attending croaker for a blunt, no, gibberish discussion, the recrimination hits like a punch to the gut. Harrison's symptoms are harmonious with exposure, not illness, meaning that nearly ever commodity poisonous entered this child's system, designedly or not, and that disclosure sends shockwaves through everyone who hears it, because accidental or deliberate, it means Harrison's suffering was avoidable. And suddenly every grown-up who crossed his path in recent days becomes a suspect in the court of public grief, while Phyllis, formerly on edge, explodes when she overhears the word exposure, unleashing a furious diatribe about negligence, neglectfulness, and selfish grown-ups who suppose their schemes do and have consequences, her voice echoing down the hallway as she vows that if this was caused by someone's asininity, she'll make sure they pay for it tenfold. And Kyle, eavesdropping fractions of her fury, feels a new surge of nausea roll through him, because part of him formerly knows that this verity, whatever it is, will destroy someone, and he's alarmed it might destroy him too. And as the morning progresses, the croakers allow Harrison to be gently awakened for brief moments, precisely covering his responses, and the first time his eyelids flutter open, just slightly, Kyle's breath catches so sprucely it hurts, his voice breaking as he whispers Harrison's name, hysterical to speak too loudly, hysterical to startle him, hysterical. This fragile phenomenon might evaporate if he blinks, and Harrison, weak and confused, murmurs a soft, slightly audible "Dad," a single word that hugely undoes Kyle, who dissolves into gashes, pressing his forepart to the mattress, brooding gratefulness to any force that might be hearkening, while Summer turns down, crying openly, overwhelmed by the relief and terror colliding inside her, and for a fragile moment, it feels like perhaps, just perhaps, they've been spared the worst, but that relief is transitory, because the croakers snappily advise that Harrison is out of peril, that complications are still possible, and that the source of the exposure must be linked to help farther detriment, turning the sanitarium from a sanctuary into a crime scene of feathers. And as investigators still begin asking questions, pressures explode, because no bone wants to believe they could be responsible, yet everyone fears they might be, and Diane, formerly walking a tightrope of trust, becomes sorrowfully apprehensive of how snappily dubitation can turn toward her, with sideways glances and hushed exchanges reminding her that her history makes her an easy target. Indeed, though her heart is breaking just as important as everyone differently, and Jack, seeing the shift, weigh in protectively, advising Victor and Phyllis that this isn't the time for witch hunts, but Victor, unmoved, argues that guarding Harrison means uncovering the verity, no matter how uncomfortable it is, and nearly in the middle of that clash lies the unsupportable reality that someone close to Harrison made a choice, or an oversight, that nearly bring him his life. And as Kyle listens to these grown-ups argue in low, heated voices just outside his son's room, commodity inside him hardens, because while fear has ruled him for days, wrathfulness is now creeping in, sharp and focused, and he makes a silent oath that formerly Harrison is safe. He'll get answers, no matter who those answers interlace. And as the day wears on, prostration takes its risk, but Kyle still refuses to leave. Indeed, when Jack gently urges him to rest, because sleep feels like a treason, like abandoning his post, and in the quiet stretches, Kyle addresses to Harrison vocally, telling him stories, apologizing again and again, promising changes that feel monumental in the wake of this trauma, lower work, smaller fights, further presence, further love, because facing the near loss of his child has ripped down every vision he ever had about what truly matters, and Summer, hearkening, feels her own resoluteness shifting, realizing that no matter what happens between her and Kyle romantically, their participated responsibility to Harrison must come first, always, and that understanding forges a new, unbreakable bond between them, indeed as old injuries remain, and outside the room. Victor receives evidence of commodity deeply troubling. A substance set up in Harrison's system traces back to a point that should no way have been within his reach, commodity brought into his terrain by a grown-up who is careless, not vicious, but whose despair or distress